Eliza Moore pressed her son against her chest, feeling his tiny ribs through the thin blanket. 3 days without food. Her husband gone for 6 weeks. The Wyoming wind howled outside their cabin like a hungry wolf, and inside death waited with patient, cold hands. She had nothing left, no food, no hope, no strength to even stand. Then came the knock. Before we begin this journey of survival and unexpected grace, please stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's step into Eliza's darkest hour. The silence inside the cabin was worse than the wind. Eliza had learned to measure time differently in the past 3 days. Not by the sun's movement across the sky or the shadows creeping along the rough wooden walls, but by Noah's cries. How often they came, how long they lasted, how much strength remained in his tiny lungs. This morning, the cry had been weak. A mewling sound, barely human, like a kitten drowning in a well. She lay on the bed, if you could call it that, just a wooden frame with a corn husk mattress that crackled with every movement, and stared at the ceiling beams her husband Thomas had set in place 2 years ago. He'd been so proud of this cabin, their future. "We'll fill it with children," he'd promised, his hands rough and warm as they covered hers. "A whole house full of laughter and noise. You'll see, Eliza, we're going to build something real out here." Real. The word tasted like ash in her mouth now. Noah stirred against her chest, and she looked down at him. 5 months old. His eyes, Thomas's eyes, that startling blue that reminded her of Montana sky, were open but unfocused. His skin, once pink and healthy, had taken on a grayish pallor that terrified her more than she wanted to admit. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry, baby." The words hung in the air, useless as prayers. She tried to remember when she'd last eaten. Was it 3 days ago? 4? The last of the cornmeal had gone into a thin gruel she'd forced down, hoping it would help her milk come in stronger. But her body had nothing left to give. She'd tried nursing Noah this morning, and he'd latched on desperately, sucking and sucking at emptiness until they were both crying. Eliza closed her eyes, but that was worse. Behind her eyelids, she saw Thomas, not as he'd been that last morning 6 weeks ago, confident and reassuring as he'd saddled his horse, but as he might be now, dead in a ditch somewhere, thrown from his horse, frozen, shot, lying in an unmarked grave or no grave at all, just bones bleaching under the endless Wyoming sky. "Stop it," she told herself aloud. "Stop!" But she couldn't stop the thoughts any more than she could stop the hunger gnawing at her insides. She forced herself to sit up, the room tilting dangerously. Noah made that weak mewling sound again, and she cradled him closer, feeling the terrible lightness of him. Babies were supposed to be solid, heavy with health and growth. Noah felt like bird bones wrapped in skin. The cabin spun around her. One room, 16 by 20 feet. A cook stove in the corner, cold now for 2 days. She'd burned the last of the wood yesterday. A table Thomas had built. 2 chairs. A trunk with her mother's quilt folded inside. The one piece of home she'd brought from Pennsylvania. Shelves on the wall, empty except for a single tin cup and a water bucket. The water bucket was still half full at least. The creek ran year-round just 50 yards from the cabin. She'd made that journey yesterday, stumbling through the snow, Noah tied to her chest with a shawl. It had taken everything she had. She wasn't sure she could make it again. Eliza stood slowly, gripping the bedpost for support. The room swayed, then settled. She moved to the window, each step requiring conscious thought. Left foot, right foot, don't fall, don't drop the baby. Outside, Wyoming stretched in every direction, beautiful and brutal. Snow covered everything, softening the harsh landscape into rolling white hills that looked peaceful from inside. Deceptive. Eliza knew what lay beneath that beauty. Rocks that could break an ankle. Ravines that appeared without warning. Cold that could steal your life in a single night if you made one wrong turn. The nearest neighbor was the Hutchinson family, 5 miles east. She'd met Martha Hutchinson once, a brisk, kind woman with 4 children and hands that never stopped moving. But 5 miles might as well have been 500. Not in this snow, not with a baby, not with her strength gone. Thomas had promised to be back in 2 weeks, 3 at most. The journey to Sweetwater Station was only 40 miles, a day-and-a-half ride in good weather. He'd go, get their winter supplies, maybe stop at the land office to file their claim properly, and come home. "It's just a formality," he'd said, kissing her forehead. "But it'll make this place officially ours, legal and proper. When I get back, we'll celebrate. I'll bring you something nice from the general store. Maybe some of that peppermint candy you like." 6 weeks ago, she'd watched him ride away, Noah asleep in her arms, the morning sun turning everything golden. She'd believed in that golden light, believed in Thomas's promises, believed in their future. Fool. A gust of wind rattled the window, and Eliza flinched. The glass, real glass, another thing Thomas had been proud of, was frosted with ice on the inside. Her breath came out in clouds. The cabin was barely warmer than the outdoors. Noah whimpered, and she realized she was holding him too tight. She loosened her grip, swaying slightly, singing without thinking. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." Her mother had sung that to her, had sung it to all 8 of her siblings back in Pennsylvania, in the warm, crowded house that had always smelled of bread baking and her father's pipe tobacco. Eliza had left that house at 18, eager for adventure, for the West, for a husband who promised her the sky. "And if that mockingbird don't sing, Mama's gonna buy you a diamond ring." The lies we tell children, she thought, the lies we tell ourselves. There would be no mockingbird, no diamond ring. There would only be this: a cold cabin, an empty larder, a baby growing weaker by the hour, and a mother who had failed him. She moved to the cupboard, though she knew what she'd find. Opening it was just a ritual now, a way to pretend she still had choices. The shelves stared back at her, bare wood mocking her desperation. Not quite empty, though. In the back corner sat a tin of lard, scraped so clean the metal showed through. Next to it, a small jar with perhaps a tablespoon of honey crusted around the bottom. And on the top shelf, pushed far back, the salt cellar. Salt. Honey. The ghosts of lard. She could scrape the honey jar, mix it with water, make Noah drink it. Maybe it would give him something, some tiny bit of energy. Maybe it would buy them one more day. One more day for what? The thought was cruel but insistent. One more day to starve more slowly? No. She said it firmly, surprising herself. No. Eliza closed the cupboard door and turned around, surveying the cabin with fresh eyes. She wasn't dead yet. Noah wasn't dead yet. While they were breathing, there were options. She could walk to the Hutchinsons, 5 miles, in the snow, with a baby. She looked down at Noah. His eyes had closed again, his breathing shallow. 5 miles would kill them both. She could wait for someone to pass by. The cabin sat a quarter-mile off the main trail from Sweetwater to Lander. In summer, they saw riders every few days. But in winter, in this snow? She'd seen no one since Thomas left. She could pray. The thought came unbidden, and with it, a wave of something that felt like shame. She'd been raised God-fearing, had believed once that prayer could move mountains. But somewhere between Pennsylvania and Wyoming, between promises and broken dreams, she'd lost the ability to believe in divine intervention. If God cared about frontier women and their babies, he had a strange way of showing it. Still, her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Pride comes before a fall, Eliza." "Fine," she whispered, and surprised herself by lowering carefully to her knees, cradling Noah against her chest. The wooden floor was cold, biting through her thin dress. She closed her eyes. "I don't," she started, then stopped. What was she even asking for? "I don't know if you're listening. I don't know if you care. But if you do, if there's any mercy left in this world, please, not for me, for him. He didn't ask to be born out here. He didn't ask for any of this. Please." She waited, eyes closed, listening. The wind howled. The cabin creaked. Noah's breath whistled softly against her neck. Nothing else. Eliza opened her eyes and stood, the movement taking more effort than it should have. Of course there was nothing. The universe didn't operate on the desperation of frontier mothers. It operated on cold mathematics. Survival of the strongest, death for the weak. She and Noah were on the wrong side of that equation. She carried Noah back to the bed and lay down, pulling the thin blanket over them both. Her wedding quilt was in the trunk, the good one, but she was saving that. For what? She wasn't sure. Maybe she thought that as long as the quilt stayed folded, as long as she didn't need its warmth, things hadn't gotten truly desperate. Stupid. Things were desperate. Things had been desperate for days, but still, she didn't get the quilt. Noah made a small sound, something between a sigh and a whimper. Eliza stroked his cheek with one finger, feeling the fragile architecture of his skull, the softness of the fontanelle where the bones hadn't yet fused. So vulnerable, so dependent on her, and she had failed him so completely. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. The apology was becoming a prayer of its own, a mantra against the silence. "I'm so sorry, baby. Your daddy's coming home. He has to be. He wouldn't leave us. He wouldn't." Even as she said it, doubt coiled in her stomach like a snake. Thomas loved them. She knew he did. But love didn't stop bullets. Love didn't prevent accidents. Love didn't protect against the 100 ways a man could die in Wyoming's wild country. The afternoon light was fading. Eliza watched the shadows lengthen across the floor, marking time in the only way that mattered now. Dark would come. Then night. Then another day, if they were lucky. If you could call it luck. She must have dozed because she jerked awake to darkness and cold. The cabin was black except for a thin line of moonlight through the window. Noah was making a sound she'd never heard before, not crying, something else, a sort of rattling wheeze. Terror shot through her like lightning. "Noah? Noah!" She sat up too fast, the room spinning. Her hands found him in the darkness, felt for his chest, rising, falling, still breathing. The wheeze continued, wet and horrible. She fumbled for the matches on the bedside table, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to strike one. The flame bloomed yellow, and she lit the stub of candle they'd been rationing. In the candlelight, Noah's face was gray. His lips had a bluish tinge. "No, no, no, no!" Eliza's voice was rising, panic threading through it. She held him upright, patting his back the way she'd seen Martha Hutchinson do with her baby. "Breathe, sweetheart, breathe." The wheezing continued. Minutes passed. How many? She didn't know. Each second stretched like hours. Then, finally, the sound eased. Noah's breathing settled into something closer to normal, though still shallow. Eliza sat there, candle burning down, holding her son and shaking. This was it. This was the end of what she could endure. Not the hunger, not the isolation, but this. The sound of her baby struggling for breath in the darkness, the absolute helplessness of her position. She'd made a mistake coming here. She'd made a mistake believing in Thomas's dreams. She'd made a mistake thinking she was strong enough for the frontier. The candle sputtered. Almost out. She should blow it out, save the last bit for another night. But another night for what? In the end, she let it burn. Dawn came slowly, gray light seeping through the frost-patterned window. Eliza hadn't slept again. She'd sat up all night, holding Noah, listening to him breathe, making bargains with a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. If he lives through the night, I'll never ask for anything else. If he lives until morning, I'll be grateful. If he just keeps breathing, I won't complain about anything ever again. Stupid bargains, desperate bargains, the kind made by people who have no cards left to play. But Noah was still breathing. Eliza stood, her body protesting every movement. She felt hollowed out, scraped clean, as if everything that made her human had been burned away, leaving only the animal imperative: survive. Keep the baby alive. Nothing else mattered. She moved to the window, Noah against her shoulder. Outside, the world was white and still. Beautiful. Deadly. A rabbit hopped across the snow, stopped, twitched its ears, continued on. Life. Continuing. Oblivious to the small tragedy unfolding in the cabin, movement caught her eye. Far off, on the main trail, something was moving. Eliza's heart jumped. A rider? She pressed her face to the cold glass, straining to see. Yes. A horse and rider, moving slowly through the snow, coming from the direction of Sweetwater Station. Thomas. It had to be Thomas. Hope exploded in her chest, painful and bright. She wanted to run outside, to wave, to scream his name, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She could barely stand, and something held her back, some small voice of caution that said, "Don't hope, don't believe, not yet." The rider was getting closer. Eliza could make out more details now. A brown horse, a man in a dark coat, a hat pulled low. Not Thomas. Thomas's horse was gray, and the way this man sat his horse, the shape of him, it was wrong. The hope drained out of her, leaving something worse than despair. At least despair was familiar. This was just emptiness. The rider was turning off the main trail, coming toward her cabin. Eliza's mind raced. A stranger. Coming to the cabin. She was alone, weak, defenseless. Every story she'd ever heard about frontier violence came flooding back. Women murdered, babies killed, cabins burned. But also, maybe he has food. Maybe he can help. Maybe he knows something about Thomas. She watched, frozen between fear and desperate hope, as the rider approached. He was close enough now that she could see his face, weathered, mid-30s maybe, with a beard. He was carrying something, a sack of some kind slung across his saddle. The horse stopped in front of the cabin. The man dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life on horseback. He pulled the sack down, hefted it over his shoulder, and walked toward the door. Eliza's heart was hammering. She looked down at Noah, then back at the door. She had no weapon. Thomas's rifle was gone. He'd taken it with him. She had a kitchen knife, but it was across the room, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to use it anyway. The knock, when it came, was gentle, almost apologetic. 3 soft raps. Then a voice muffled through the door. "Ma'am? Mrs. Moore? My name's Caleb Hart. I'm a friend of your husband's. I've brought some supplies." Eliza stood frozen. This could be a trick. People lied, especially out here where there was no law except what men made for themselves, but also supplies. The words sang in her mind like a promise. "Ma'am?" The voice came again. "I know you've got cause to be cautious, but I swear I mean you no harm. I was in Sweetwater, and, well, there's news about your husband. I thought you'd want to hear it." News about Thomas. Eliza moved toward the door before she'd made a conscious decision to do so. Her hand touched the latch. She hesitated. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Her voice came out as a croak. She cleared her throat, tried again. "How do I know you knew my husband?" A pause. Then, "Thomas Moore. Tall fellow, dark hair, has a scar on his left hand from a horse kick. Talks about his wife Eliza and baby Noah like they hung the moon. Showed me a lock of your hair he keeps in his pocket. Said it was the color of honey in sunlight." The detail about the hair broke something in Eliza. Thomas had cut that lock the night before he left, so carefully, like it was precious. She'd laughed at him, called him sentimental. "I'll keep it close to my heart," he'd said. "And when I look at it, I'll remember what I'm coming home to." Her hand lifted the latch. The door swung open and cold air rushed in, along with weak morning light. The man, Caleb Hart, stood on her threshold, and Eliza got her first clear look at him. He was taller than Thomas, broader in the shoulders. His face was wind-burned and lined, the face of someone who'd spent years under the sun. But his eyes, when they met hers, were kind, concerned. Those eyes took her in, her hollow cheeks, her trembling frame, the baby in her arms, and something shifted in his expression. Not pity, exactly. Something harder to name. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. "Ma'am," he said softly. He hefted the sack. "May I come in?" Eliza stepped back, the movement automatic. He entered, bringing with him the smell of leather and horse and the outdoors. He set the sack on the table with a solid thump that suggested weight. Substance. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. The question, asked so directly, so without judgment, cracked something in Eliza's carefully maintained composure. To her horror, she felt tears starting. She swallowed hard. 3 days. Maybe 4. I'm not sure." Caleb nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. His hands moved to the sack, untying the rope that held it closed. "And the baby?" I've been trying to nurse him, but there's nothing. I'm dry." Right. Caleb's hands didn't stop moving as he spoke, pulling items from the sack. We're going to fix that. First thing, we're going to get some food in you both. Then we're going to get a fire going, warm this place up. Then we're going to talk about next steps. Sound fair? It didn't sound fair. It sounded like a fantasy, something too good to be true. But Eliza found herself nodding anyway. Caleb was pulling things from the sack with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Bread, wrapped in cloth. A jar of what looked like milk, cheese, dried meat, apples. The sight of so much food after so many days of nothing made Eliza's knees weak. Sit, Caleb said, gesturing to one of the chairs. It was a command, but given gently. Before you fall down. Eliza sat. Noah stirred against her chest, making that weak sound again. Caleb poured milk from the jar into the tin cup, handed it to her. Drink. Slowly. Small sips. Your stomach's going to want to rebel if you go too fast. The milk was cool and sweet, the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. It took every ounce of willpower not to gulp it down. She forced herself to sip small swallows, feeling the liquid slide down her throat like a blessing. The baby, Caleb said. He old enough for milk? 5 months. I've been giving him water, but milk's better. We'll mix it with a little water, make it easier on his stomach. You got a clean rag? Eliza pointed to the shelf where she kept her washing cloths. Caleb found one, tore off a strip, poured some of the milk into another container, and added water. He dipped the rag in, then turned to Eliza. May I? She understood what he was asking. Permission to feed her son. To help. The kindness of it, the simple decency, was almost too much to bear. Yes, she whispered. Caleb took Noah with surprising gentleness for such a large man. He sat in the other chair, cradled the baby in one arm, and brought the milk-soaked rag to Noah's lips. At first, Noah didn't respond. Then his lips parted, and he began to suck weakly at the cloth. That's it, Caleb murmured. That's a good boy. Eliza watched, drinking her milk in small sips, as this stranger fed her dying baby. The surreal quality of the moment wasn't lost on her. Yesterday, she'd been ready to give up. This morning, a cowboy had knocked on her door with food and kindness. You said you had news, she said finally, about Thomas. Caleb's expression changed. The gentleness remained, but something else entered it. Regret. Sorrow. I did, he said. I do. But let's get you both stronger first. That news has waited this long. It can wait a little longer. Is he dead? The question came out flat, emotionless. Eliza was surprised by her own voice. Caleb looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw the answer before he spoke. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. He's dead. The words hung in the cold air of the cabin. Eliza heard them, understood them, but she couldn't feel them yet. There was too much else. The milk in her stomach, the stranger in her cabin, Noah's weak suckling sounds. The grief would come later. Right now, there was only this moment, and the strange mercy of a cowboy's knock. She nodded slowly. Tell me. Let me get this fire going first, Caleb said. Then I'll tell you everything. Caleb moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency, gathering what little wood remained stacked by the door. His hands worked steadily, arranging kindling in the cold stove, striking a match that flared bright in the dim morning light. The flame caught, grew, and soon the crackle of burning wood filled the silence that had pressed down on Eliza for so many days. She watched him, still sipping the milk he'd given her, still trying to reconcile the reality of his presence with the despair she'd woken to only an hour before. Noah had fallen asleep in Caleb's arms, the milk-soaked rag still clutched near his mouth. The baby's breathing was easier now, more regular. Color was already returning to his grayish cheeks. Such a small thing, milk. Such a simple mercy. Yet it was everything. You're good with babies, Eliza heard herself say. The words felt strange in her mouth, conversation after so many days of silence. Caleb glanced up from the stove, a slight smile touching his weathered face. Had some practice. Got 3 sisters, all younger. By the time the last one came along, I was changing diapers and warming bottles like I'd been born to it. He adjusted Noah in his arms, supporting the baby's head with practiced care. My ma used to say I had gentle hands for a rough man. Your mother sounds wise. She was. Died 4 years back, influenza. He said it matter-of-factly, but Eliza heard the loss beneath the words. Everyone out here had losses. They wore them like second skins. The fire was catching now, heat beginning to seep into the frozen cabin. Caleb closed the stove door and stood, still holding Noah. He looked around the room, and Eliza saw it through his eyes, the empty shelves, the bare table, the signs of desperate rationing everywhere. "How long's it been?" he asked quietly. "Since your husband left?" 6 weeks. He was supposed to be back in 2. Eliza set down her cup, her hands shaking slightly. The milk sat heavy in her stomach, her body almost confused by actual nourishment. "I kept thinking he'd come. Every day I'd watch the trail. Every night I'd tell myself tomorrow. He'll come tomorrow." Caleb nodded slowly. He moved to the rocking chair near the stove, Thomas's chair, where he used to sit in the evenings and talk about his plans, and settled into it with Noah. The baby sighed in his sleep, a sound of contentment that made Eliza's throat tight. "Mrs. Moore," Caleb began, then paused. "May I call you Eliza? Seems foolish to stand on formality when I'm holding your baby." "Eliza's fine." "Eliza, then. And you can call me Caleb." He took a breath, as if steadying himself for difficult words. "I need to tell you what happened to Thomas. It's not easy hearing, but you deserve the truth. All of it." Eliza gripped the edge of the table. "I'm listening." "I met your husband 6 weeks ago in Sweetwater Station. I was there selling horses, and he was there for supplies. We got to talking in the saloon. Nothing heavy, just the usual talk men have. Where we were from, what brought us to Wyoming, the weather. He mentioned his homestead, his wife and new baby. Showed me that lock of hair." Caleb's voice was steady, a storyteller's voice, giving her the facts straight. "He was a good man, Eliza. That came through clear, decent, hardworking, proud of what he was building with you." "Was," Eliza repeated softly. The past tense was a knife. The day Thomas was set to leave, there was trouble in town. A gang had been causing problems, the Rafferty brothers and their crew. Outlaws, the real kind. They'd robbed a supply wagon 2 weeks prior, killed the driver. The sheriff was putting together a posse to track them down. Caleb shifted Noah slightly, his eyes distant with memory. Thomas didn't have to join. Nobody would have faulted him for heading home to his family. But the Raffertys had taken supplies that belonged to folks in town, food, medicine, things people needed to survive the winter. And Thomas, he said something that stuck with me. What did he say? He said, "A man can't build a good life on a foundation of looking the other way." Caleb met her eyes. So he joined the posse, 8 men, including the sheriff. They tracked the Raffertys into the Rattlesnake Hills. Eliza closed her eyes. She could see it. Thomas on his gray horse, riding into danger because it was the right thing to do. Because he believed in community, in justice, in being the kind of man who stood up. Those same qualities that had made her love him had also taken him away. "There was a fight," Caleb continued. "The Raffertys holed up in a canyon, and the posse surrounded them. It should have been simple, 8 against 4. But nothing simple when bullets start flying." He paused, and Eliza heard the weight of what came next. Thomas took a shot to the chest. The sheriff said it was quick. He didn't suffer. The words were meant to comfort, Eliza knew. People always said that. Didn't suffer. Went quick. As if the speed of death somehow made it better, made it hurt less for those left behind. "Where is he?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "His body. Buried in Sweetwater. There's a cemetery on the hill behind the church. The whole town turned out for the funeral. The minister said words. They marked his grave properly. Wooden cross with his name and dates. The sheriff paid for it out of the reward money." Caleb's voice gentled. "They caught the Raffertys, Eliza. All 4 of them. Thomas's death wasn't for nothing. They recovered the stolen supplies, and 3 other families got their property back. Your husband's last act saved people. That counts for something." "Did it?" Eliza wanted to ask. Did it count for anything when she was alone with a baby in a freezing cabin, starving, abandoned? Did justice for strangers balance against the loss of a father, a husband, a future? But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she asked, "How did you know to come here?" To bring supplies? I didn't. Not at first. Caleb looked down at Noah, his expression thoughtful. After the funeral, the talk in town was about Thomas's widow and baby out here alone. The sheriff mentioned sending someone to check on you, but winter hit hard right after, and the trails got bad. Weeks passed. I kept thinking about you out here, not knowing. Then 3 days ago, I finished my business in Sweetwater, and I thought someone's got to tell her, someone's got to make sure she's all right. So you came? Eliza felt something shift inside her chest, some tight knot loosening slightly. You didn't know us. You didn't owe us anything, but you came. Seemed like the thing to do.
Caleb said it simply, as if riding 40 miles through snow to help a stranger was the most natural thing in the world. Besides, I made a promise to Thomas the night before the posse left. We were having drinks and he was talking about you and the baby. He got quiet for a minute, then he looked at me and said, "If something happens to me, I need to know someone will check on them. Will you do that? Will you make sure my family's taken care of?" Caleb's jaw tightened. I told him nothing was going to happen, but I also said yes. A man's word is his bond, especially to the dying. He knew, Eliza said, understanding blooming cold in her chest. He knew it was dangerous. He knew he might not come back. Maybe. Or maybe he was just being careful. Either way, I made that promise, and I aimed to keep it. The fire popped and crackled. Heat was filling the cabin now, pushing back the cold that had lived in these walls for days.
Eliza felt it on her skin, felt her frozen muscles beginning to unknot. With the warmth came feeling, and with feeling came grief. It rose in her like a tide, dark and overwhelming. Thomas was dead. Had been dead for weeks while she waited, while she hoped, while she told herself he was just delayed. All those nights she'd lain awake listening for hoofbeats, imagining his return. He'd already been in the ground, already cold, already gone. "I need," she started, then couldn't finish. Her breath was coming short, her vision blurring with tears she'd been too dehydrated to cry before. Caleb was on his feet instantly, Noah cradled in one arm. He guided Eliza back to the bed with his free hand, easing her down. "Let it out," he said quietly. "You've been strong long enough." And she did. The sobs came from somewhere deep, somewhere she'd kept locked and barred for 6 weeks. They racked her body, violent and cleansing, tears streaming down her face for the husband she'd lost, for the future that had died with him, for the terror of the past few days, and the hopelessness that had nearly consumed her. Caleb didn't try to quiet her or offer empty platitudes. He simply stood nearby, holding her son, letting her grieve. When Noah stirred and began to fuss, Caleb paced the small cabin, rocking him gently, humming some tuneless melody that nonetheless soothed the baby back to sleep. Eventually, the storm passed. Eliza's sobs faded to quiet tears, then to silence. She lay on the bed, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with hunger, everything to do with loss. "I loved him," she said into the quiet. "Even when he drove me crazy with his big dreams and his stubbornness, I loved him." "He knew," Caleb replied. "Trust me, he knew. That's all he talked about, getting home to you." Eliza sat up slowly, wiping her face with her sleeve. Her eyes felt swollen, her head ached, but there was also a strange clarity. The worst had happened. Thomas was dead. She'd grieved, and yet she was still here. Noah was still here. The world hadn't ended, even though it felt like it should have. "What happens now?" she asked. Caleb settled back into the rocking chair, Noah still sleeping peacefully in his arms. It struck Eliza how natural he looked holding her son, this stranger who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't quite believed in. "Now," Caleb said, "we take things one step at a time. First step is getting you both healthy again. You need to eat regularly, build your strength back up. I brought enough supplies to last you 2 weeks, maybe 3, if you're careful. Second step is figuring out your situation. This homestead, is it legally yours?" Eliza nodded. "Thomas filed the claim when we first arrived, but he was going to Sweetwater to finalize the paperwork, make sure everything was in order." "Did he finish that before he died?" "I don't know. I don't know what he did or didn't do. The helplessness of it washed over her. I don't know anything. That's all right. That's something I can find out when I go back to town. If the claim's in order, this land is yours. If not, we'll figure out how to make it right. Caleb's voice was calm, practical. The thing is, Eliza, you can't stay out here alone. Not through the winter, not with a baby. I don't have anywhere else to go. The words came out sharper than she intended. I don't have family out here. My people are all back in Pennsylvania, and I don't have money for travel even if I wanted to go back. This cabin, this land, it's all I have. I understand that, but having land and surviving on it alone are two different things. You need help, at least through the winter. Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully. There's a boarding house in Sweetwater run by a woman named Margaret Chen. She takes in women who need a place to stay, widows mostly, and women traveling through. The rooms are clean, the food's good, and she charges fair rates. More importantly, she's got a kind heart and won't judge your situation. I told you, I don't have money. Margaret's not just about money. She also needs help running the place, cooking, cleaning, mending. You could work for your room and board until you get on your feet. Caleb met her eyes steadily. It's not charity, Eliza. It's a fair trade. Your labor for a safe place to live. The idea of leaving the cabin, Thomas's cabin, the home they'd built together, felt like betrayal. But the idea of staying here alone, of facing another night like last night, terrified her more. I need to think, she said. Fair enough? You've got time. I'm not planning to leave for a few days anyway. Figured I'd stick around, make sure you're stable, chop some wood, maybe do some repairs around here. He glanced at the ceiling, where one beam showed signs of rot. Place could use some work. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. I want to. Caleb stood, bringing Noah to her. Here, he should be with his mama, and you should eat something more. There's bread and cheese in that sack. Don't be shy about it. Eliza took Noah, cradling him against her chest. He was warm, sleeping deeply, his breathing steady and strong. The difference from this morning was remarkable. Food and warmth, such simple things, but they'd brought her baby back from the edge. Caleb moved to the table and began unpacking more supplies from his sack. Eliza watched him work. This cowboy who'd appeared at her darkest hour. He wasn't young. She guessed him to be in his mid-30s, old enough to have lived some life. His hands were scarred and calloused, working hands, but they moved gently as he arranged bread and cheese on the table, as they'd moved gently with Noah. Why are you really doing this? She asked. The truth. Caleb paused, a jar of preserves in his hand. He set it down slowly, then turned to face her. You want the truth? All right. He leaned against the table, arms crossed. When I was 23, I was engaged to a girl named Sarah Brennan. Prettiest thing you ever saw, with a laugh that could light up a room. We were going to get married in the spring, build a ranch together, have a house full of kids. His voice was even, but Eliza heard old pain beneath it. That winter, there was a fire in town. Sarah's boarding house went up like kindling. She was trapped on the second floor. Eliza's breath caught. I was 3 miles away when it happened. By the time I got there, the building was gone. Sarah was gone. And you know what haunted me? What still haunts me? Caleb's gray eyes were steady on hers. There were people who saw the fire starting, people who could have helped, who could have raised the alarm sooner, but they didn't want to get involved. They thought someone else would handle it. By the time anyone acted, it was too late. I'm sorry, Eliza whispered. Me too. Every day for 12 years I've been sorry. Caleb straightened. But I learned something from it. Learned that when you see someone in trouble, you don't wait for someone else to help. You don't make excuses. You act, because the cost of looking away is something you carry forever. He gestured around the cabin. When I heard about Thomas dying and leaving a wife and baby out here alone, I knew I had to come. Knew I couldn't be one of those people who sees trouble and walks past. The honesty of it, the raw truth, settled between them like a living thing. Eliza understood then that Caleb wasn't here out of pity or duty or even just to keep a promise to Thomas. He was here because he'd learned the hard way what happened when people failed each other, and he'd decided to be different. Thank you, she said quietly, for not walking past. Caleb nodded, then turned back to the supplies, the moment of vulnerability passing.
Now eat something. Doctor's orders. You're a doctor now? I'm whatever you need me to be until you're back on your feet. There was a hint of humor in his voice, the first she'd heard. Today I'm a doctor. Tomorrow, maybe a carpenter. Day after that, we'll see. Despite everything, the grief, the exhaustion, the uncertainty, Eliza felt the corners of her mouth lift slightly. Not quite a smile, but the memory of one. She rose and moved to the table, Noah still in her arms. Caleb had laid out a feast by her standards. Thick slices of bread, a wedge of yellow cheese, strips of dried beef, the jar of preserves that turned out to be raspberry. There was also cornmeal, flour, sugar, coffee, and a small tin of tea. This is too much, Eliza said, looking at the abundance. It's exactly enough. Eat. She did, breaking off pieces of bread and cheese, feeding herself slowly while Noah slept against her shoulder. Each bite was a revelation. The salt of the cheese, the sweetness of the preserves, the satisfying density of the bread. Her body accepted the food gratefully, her stomach settling after the initial rebellion. Caleb busied himself around the cabin, giving her space to eat. He examined the stove more closely, checked the chimney, tested the strength of the table legs. His presence was oddly comforting, solid and capable, asking nothing of her except that she take care of herself. After she'd eaten all she could manage, Eliza felt tiredness washing over her in waves. Real tiredness, not the weakness of starvation, but the deep fatigue that comes after crisis has passed. You should sleep, Caleb said, noticing. Real sleep, not that half-awake vigilance you've been doing. I'll watch the baby. Keep the fire going. You rest. I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. His tone was firm but kind. Eliza, when's the last time you slept more than an hour at a stretch? She couldn't remember. The nights had blurred together, each one an exercise in survival. Exactly, Caleb said, reading her silence. So sleep. I'll be right here. There were 100 reasons to protest, but Eliza found she didn't have the energy for any of them. She moved to the bed, still holding Noah. Caleb brought over the good quilt from the trunk, the one she'd been saving, and draped it over them both. Sleep, he said again quietly. I've got watch. Eliza's eyes closed almost before she meant them to. The last thing she was aware of was the crackling of the fire, the warmth of the quilt, and Noah's steady breathing against her chest. For the first time in 6 weeks, she felt safe. She slept. When she woke, the cabin was warm and the light had changed. Afternoon, she guessed, though she wasn't sure. For a moment, she panicked, not knowing where she was, why she felt so warm. Then memory returned in a rush. Caleb, the food, the news about Thomas. She sat up slowly, expecting to find the cabin empty, half convinced she'd dreamed the whole thing. But Caleb was there, sitting at the table working on something with a knife and a piece of wood. Noah was awake in a makeshift nest of blankets near the stove, watching the play of firelight with wide, fascinated eyes. You're still here, Eliza said, her voice rough with sleep. Caleb looked up, offering a small smile. Told you I would be. How do you feel? Like I slept for a week. She pushed the quilt aside and stood, steadier than she'd been in days. How long was I out? 4 hours, give or take. The baby woke up about an hour ago. I gave him some more of that milk mixture. He took to it pretty well. Caleb held up what he'd been working on, a small wooden rattle, the kind babies could grasp. Figured I'd make him a toy. Hope that's all right. Eliza moved to where Noah lay and knelt beside him. He turned his head at her voice, and she saw with relief that his eyes were brighter, more alert. The grayish pallor was gone, replaced by healthy pink. He looked like her son again, not the ghost baby from this morning. Hey, sweet boy, she murmured, picking him up. He made a happy gurgling sound, and something in Eliza's chest unlocked. Her baby was going to live. They both were. Thank you, she said to Caleb, for watching him, for all of it. No need for thanks. I'm just glad I got here when I did. He set down the rattle and stood, stretching. I chopped some more wood while you slept. There's enough now to last you at least a week, maybe more. Also patched that loose board on the porch. Won't have it coming up and catching someone's boot. You've done too much already. Haven't done enough yet.
Caleb moved to the window, looking out at the fading afternoon light. Storm's coming in. Can feel it in the air. We'll probably be snowed in for a few days once it hits. Which is fine. Gives us time to get you really stable before I head back to town. The thought of being alone again, even in a warm cabin with food, made Eliza's stomach knot. But she pushed the feeling aside. She couldn't depend on this stranger forever. At some point, she'd have to stand on her own feet again. "Tell me about Sweetwater," she said, settling into the rocking chair with Noah. "What's it like?" Caleb turned from the window, seemed to consider the question. "It's small but growing, maybe 300 people now. There's a main street with a general store, saloon, boarding house, church, and a few other businesses. Doc Morrison runs a practice there. Good man, knows his medicine. There's a school too, though it's just one room with Miss Patterson teaching all the ages together. Families there. Other children? Plenty. Sweetwater's the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, for better or worse. You can't keep secrets, but you also don't lack for help when you need it. Folks look out for each other." He paused. "I won't lie to you. Being a widow with a baby, you'll be the subject of some talk. People will have opinions about what you should do, where you should go, how you should live. But most of them mean well, even if they're nosy about it." Eliza rocked Noah gently, thinking about what it would mean to leave this cabin, to move to town, to become one of those people everyone knew and talked about. The idea was both terrifying and oddly appealing. She'd been isolated so long, first by distance and then by disaster. The thought of community, even gossipy community, had a certain draw. "What about work?" she asked. "Besides the boarding house, I mean, what do women do there?" "All kinds of things. Mrs. Chen at the boarding house, she's not just a landlady, she also does laundry for half the town and bakes bread to sell. Miss Patterson teaches. Doc Morrison's wife runs a small shop where she sells herbs and remedies she makes herself. There's women who take in sewing, women who cook for the saloon, women who help out at the general store." Caleb sat back down at the table. "Point is, there's opportunities if you're willing to work, and you strike me as someone willing to work." "I've never been afraid of work." Eliza thought of her childhood in Pennsylvania, helping her mother with 8 siblings, learning to cook and clean and sew and garden. She'd brought those skills west, thinking she'd use them to build a frontier homestead with Thomas. Now she'd have to use them just to survive. "But I've never been on my own before either. I went from my father's house to Thomas's cabin. I don't know how to be alone." "You won't be alone. That's what community is for." Caleb's voice was gentle. "And you're stronger than you think, Eliza. Anyone who survived the last few days is strong enough for anything." They talked through the evening as the light faded outside. Caleb told her more about Sweetwater, about the people she might meet, about what to expect. He was a good storyteller, painting pictures with his words. Mrs. Chen, with her no-nonsense manner and secret soft heart. Doc Morrison, who could set any bone and cure any ailment but couldn't cook to save his life. Sheriff Dawson, who was fair but hard. The kind of man you wanted on your side. In turn, Eliza found herself talking about Thomas, about their courtship back in Pennsylvania, about his dreams for their homestead. It hurt to remember, but it also felt necessary, like lancing a wound so it could heal properly. "He wanted to plant apple trees," she said at one point, looking out the darkening window. "Said in 5 years we'd have our own orchard. He was always thinking 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead, planning for a future he didn't get to see." "Those dreams weren't wasted," Caleb said quietly. "They brought you here. They gave you Noah. That counts for something." Did it? Eliza still wasn't sure, but she appreciated Caleb's attempts to find meaning in the wreckage. As night fell, Caleb prepared a proper meal. Cornmeal mush with butter and sugar, dried beef simmered until it was tender, strong coffee that Eliza hadn't tasted in weeks. They ate together at the small table, and for a few moments the cabin felt almost normal. Not happy, not yet, but lived in. Human. After dinner, Caleb spread his bedroll near the door. "I'll sleep here tonight," he said. "Storm will hit before morning, and I want to make sure we're secure." Eliza didn't argue. She was tired again, her body still recovering, still learning to trust that food and warmth would continue. She changed Noah, fed him another bottle of diluted milk that Caleb had prepared, and settled into bed with her son. "Caleb?" she called softly into the darkness. Yeah? When you go back to Sweetwater, I want to come with you, to the boarding house. I want to try. There was a pause, then, Good, that's good, Eliza. It's the right choice. I hope so. It is, trust me. Eliza closed her eyes, listening to Noah's breathing, to the wind beginning to pick up outside, to the quiet sounds of Caleb settling in by the door. A stranger was sleeping in her cabin. Her husband was dead and buried in a town she'd never seen, and her entire future was uncertain. But she was alive. Her son was alive. And for tonight, in this moment, that was enough. The storm hit just before dawn, wind howling around the cabin like something alive and angry. But inside, the fire burned warm, the supplies sat secure on the shelves, and 3 hearts beat steady in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tomorrow was still hours away, and tonight, Eliza Moore allowed herself something she hadn't felt in 6 weeks. Hope. The storm lasted 3 days. Snow fell in sheets, piling against the cabin walls until the windows were half buried in white. The wind screamed and moaned, finding every crack in the wood, every weakness in the structure Thomas had built. But inside, the fire never went out. Caleb kept it fed, kept the cabin warm, while Eliza focused on regaining her strength and caring for Noah. On the second day, she woke to find Caleb already up, coffee brewing on the stove. He'd made breakfast, fried cornmeal cakes with a drizzle of honey, and the smell alone was enough to make her stomach growl. "Morning," he said, not looking up from the pan. "How'd you sleep?" "Better." It was true. Each night brought deeper rest, her body slowly trusting that it wouldn't wake to cold and starvation. "How's the storm?" "Still raging. We're not going anywhere today." He plated the cornmeal cakes and brought them to the table. "Which is fine. Gives us time to talk about practical matters." Eliza settled Noah in his blanket nest and joined Caleb at the table. The food was simple but good, and she ate slowly, savoring each bite. Her appetite was returning, her body demanding fuel to repair the damage of those terrible weeks. "What kind of practical matters?" she asked between bites. Caleb poured coffee for them both, his movements deliberate. "Your claim on this land, your husband's affairs, what you'll need in town." He took a sip of coffee. "I've been thinking about it, and there's some things we should settle before we leave." "All right. First, the homestead claim. You said Thomas filed it but was going to finalize the paperwork. Do you have any documents here? Anything that proves your ownership?" Eliza thought for a moment, then rose and went to the trunk. Beneath her mother's quilt was a small wooden box where Thomas had kept important papers. She brought it to the table and opened it, revealing a handful of documents. There was their marriage certificate, worn at the folds from the journey west. Noah's birth record, which Thomas had written out himself in his careful hand. A deed to the land, stamped and signed, with Thomas Moore's name in bold letters at the top. Caleb examined the deed carefully, holding it up to the light from the window. "This is good, real good. The claim's properly filed, and it's in Thomas's name as head of household. As his widow, this transfers to you automatically. The land is yours, Eliza, legal and clear." Relief washed through her. "So I won't lose it?" "Not unless you choose to sell it or abandon it. Though," Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully, "there is the matter of proving up. You know about that?" Eliza nodded slowly. Every homesteader knew the rules. You had to live on the land for 5 years, make improvements, cultivate crops. Only then did the land truly become yours, free and clear. "Thomas and I were in our 2nd year," she said. "We built the cabin, started clearing fields. We were going to plant wheat come spring." "Right, and now you're on your own." Caleb set down the deed. "The law says you have to maintain the claim. Live here, work the land. If you move to town permanently, you could lose it. But if you move to town temporarily, with the intention of returning, the claim should hold, especially given that you're a widow with an infant. The land office tends to be reasonable in cases like yours." "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you go to town for the winter, get stable, get strong. Come spring, you can decide what you want to do with this place. Maybe you'll want to sell it. Maybe you'll want to hire help and try to work it. Maybe you'll want to hold on to it, but not live here. All of those are options, but you don't have to decide now." Caleb's gray eyes were steady on hers. Right now, you just need to survive. Everything else can wait. It made sense, the practical logic of it, but the thought of leaving, even temporarily, still felt like betrayal. This cabin held 2 years of her life, her marriage, her dreams. Thomas had built every beam, chinked every gap. Leaving it felt like leaving him all over again. I know it's hard, Caleb said quietly, reading her face, but staying here alone won't bring him back. And it might kill you and the baby before winter's done. You know that, don't you? I know. Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. I thought we'd grow old here. I thought I'd bury him in the little plot by the creek when we were both gray and tired. I never thought I'd be leaving so soon, with him already in the ground somewhere I've never seen. Caleb reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The gesture was simple, almost brotherly, but the warmth of human contact after so much isolation brought tears to Eliza's eyes. You're not leaving him, Caleb said firmly. You're carrying him with you, in your memories, in your son, in the strength he helped you build. Thomas lives in all of that, and no piece of land can hold him better than you already do. The words settled into her chest, easing something she hadn't known was tight. She wiped her eyes and nodded. All right, we'll go to town, but I want to come back in the spring. I want to see what this place looks like when it's not trying to kill me. A hint of a smile touched Caleb's face. Deal. Now, second practical matter, money. Do you have any? Savings? Anything Thomas might have left? Eliza shook her head. We spent everything we had building this place and buying supplies. Thomas was going to sell some furs and deer hides in Sweetwater, use that money for winter provisions. But I don't know if he did before. She couldn't finish the sentence. He did, Caleb said. I checked with the general store. Thomas sold his furs and hides the day he arrived. Got a fair price, too. The money was supposed to be for supplies, but then he joined the posse and... He paused. The thing is, that money's still at the general store. Mr. Hendricks, the owner, he held on to it when he heard about Thomas, said it belonged to the widow and he'd keep it safe until someone came to claim it. How much? $43. Eliza's breath caught. $43. It was more than she'd dared hope for. Not a fortune, but enough to give her options, enough to keep her and Noah for months if she was careful. That changes things, she said slowly. It does. With that money, you can pay Mrs. Chen for room and board if you want, or you can work for your keep and save the money for later. Either way, you've got resources. You're not starting from nothing. They talked through the morning, making plans. Caleb would take her to Sweetwater as soon as the storm broke. He'd introduce her to Mrs. Chen, help her get settled, make sure she collected Thomas's money from the general store. He'd also take her to see Thomas's grave if she wanted. I do, Eliza said when he mentioned it. I need to see it, to make it real. Understood. The third day of the storm was quieter. The wind died down, and the snow fell softly instead of in violent sheets. By afternoon, patches of blue were visible through the clouds. We'll leave tomorrow, Caleb said, standing at the window. If the weather holds. That night, Eliza packed what little she owned. Her clothes, plain and practical. Noah's things, the few baby garments she'd sewn, the blankets, the wooden rattle Caleb had made, her mother's quilt, the box with the important papers. It all fit in one small trunk and a canvas bag. Everything else, the furniture, the dishes, the tools, would stay. The cabin would wait, locked and quiet, for her return. If she returned. She stood in the doorway as the sun set, looking at the room that had been her home, the bed where Noah was born, the table where she and Thomas had eaten countless meals, talking and planning and dreaming, the stove where she'd learned to bake bread at high altitude, where she'd burned more dinners than she cared to count, while Thomas laughed and ate them anyway. Goodbye, she whispered. Then, more firmly, I'll be back. They left at dawn. Caleb had hitched his horse to a small sledge he'd fashioned from wood he found in the lean-to. It wasn't pretty, but it would carry Eliza, Noah, and their belongings across the snow more easily than trying to ride horseback. Eliza took one last look at the cabin, small and sturdy against the endless white landscape. Then she settled into the sledge with Noah bundled against her chest, and Caleb clicked his tongue at the horse. They moved slowly, following the trail when they could find it, Caleb's instinct and experience when they couldn't. The world was silent except for the creak of the sledge and the soft crunch of hooves on snow. Beautiful and deadly, just as it had always been. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horse and eat. Caleb had packed food for the journey, bread and cheese and dried meat. They sat on a fallen log, Noah asleep in Eliza's arms, and ate without talking much. "You doing all right?" Caleb asked eventually. "I think so. It's strange, leaving, but also—" Eliza searched for the right words. "Also a relief. Is that terrible? To feel relieved?" "No, it's human." Caleb took a drink from his canteen, then offered it to her. "You've been through hell, Eliza. Feeling relief at leaving hell behind isn't terrible. It's survival." They reached Sweetwater as the sun was setting on the second day of travel. Eliza's first glimpse of the town was underwhelming. A handful of buildings clustered along a wide dirt street, smoke rising from chimneys, yellow light glowing in windows. After the isolation of the homestead, though, it looked like civilization, like safety. Caleb guided the horse down the main street, and Eliza saw the buildings he'd described. The general store, its porch stacked with goods. The saloon, already noisy with evening customers. A small church with a white steeple. And at the far end of the street, a large two-story building with a sign that read, "Chen's Boarding House." They stopped in front of it. Caleb helped Eliza down from the sledge, and she stood for a moment, Noah in her arms, looking up at the building that might become her new home. "Ready?" Caleb asked. "No, but let's go anyway." The door opened before they could knock. A woman stood there, small and neat, with black hair pulled back in a bun and dark eyes that took in everything at once. She was perhaps 50, with the kind of face that could look stern or kind depending on her mood. "Caleb Hart," she said, her voice carrying a trace of an accent Eliza couldn't place. "I wondered if you'd make it back before the next storm." "Mrs. Chen," Caleb removed his hat. "I brought someone who needs your help. This is Eliza Moore, Thomas Moore's widow, and her son Noah." Mrs. Chen's expression shifted immediately from businesslike to compassionate. Come in. You must be frozen." She stepped aside, gesturing them into a warm hallway that smelled of cooking food and wood smoke. "I heard about your husband, Mrs. Moore. I'm very sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Eliza managed. They followed Mrs. Chen down the hallway and into a large parlor. A fire burned in the hearth, and several women sat in chairs around it, sewing or reading. They looked up with open curiosity as Eliza entered. "Ladies, this is Mrs. Eliza Moore. She'll be staying with us for a while, Mrs." Chen's tone made it clear that gossip would not be tolerated. "Mrs. Moore, these are some of my other guests. That's Mrs. Patterson. She teaches at the school. Miss Sarah Reeves, she's passing through on her way to California. And Mrs. Dorothy Hutchinson." At the last name, Eliza's head snapped up. "Hutchinson? Martha Hutchinson's family?" Dorothy Hutchinson, a plump woman with a kind face, smiled. "You know Martha. She's my sister-in-law, lives 5 miles east of here with her husband and children." "She was my nearest neighbor," Eliza said. "We only met once, but she was kind." "That's Martha, kind to a fault." Dorothy set down her sewing and stood. "I'm in town visiting for a few weeks." "It's good to meet you properly, Mrs. Moore." The other women murmured greetings, and Eliza felt overwhelmed by the sudden presence of so many people. After weeks of isolation, even friendly faces felt like too much. Mrs. Chen seemed to sense this. "Ladies, please excuse us. I need to get Mrs. Moore settled." She turned to Eliza. "Come with me. I'll show you your room." They climbed a narrow staircase to the second floor. The hallway was clean and plain, with doors on either side. Mrs. Chen opened one near the end. "This will be yours. It's small, but it's warm and private. There's a bed, a dresser, a chair, wash basin on the dresser, chamber pot under the bed. Outhouse is behind the building, but I keep a thunder mug in each room for night use." She gestured around the space, which was indeed small but clean and welcoming. "Meals are at 7 in the morning, noon, and 6 in the evening. You're expected to help with cleanup after. If you need anything washed, bring it down on Monday mornings. Any questions?" Eliza's head was spinning. How much? For the room and board? Mrs. Chen's expression softened. We can discuss that tomorrow. Tonight you just get settled. There's hot water downstairs if you want to wash up, and I'll bring you a supper tray. You look like you could use some peace and quiet. I can work, Eliza said quickly. I'm not asking for charity. I can cook, clean, sew, whatever you need. I know you can. Caleb told me about you. Mrs. Chen's smile was small but genuine. But tonight you rest. We'll talk business tomorrow. She left, closing the door quietly behind her. Eliza stood in the center of the small room, Noah in her arms, and felt something crack open inside her chest. She was safe. She was warm. She had a bed, a roof, people around her. The terror of the past weeks, the desperate isolation, the fear of dying alone. It was over. Eliza sank onto the bed and wept, this time not from grief, but from sheer relief. The next morning, Eliza woke to sunlight streaming through a real glass window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then Noah stirred beside her, and it all came back. Sweetwater, the boarding house, safety. She dressed quickly in her cleanest dress, which still looked shabby and worn, and carried Noah downstairs. The dining room was full of people, not just the women from last night, but others too. Men in work clothes eating breakfast before heading out to their jobs. A family with 3 children, the youngest not much older than Noah. The noise and bustle was overwhelming after so much silence. Mrs. Chen appeared at her elbow. Come, sit. There's oatmeal and bacon, biscuits and gravy. Help yourself. Eliza filled a plate, though she still couldn't eat much at once, and found a seat at the long table. Dorothy Hutchinson sat across from her, and they exchanged shy smiles. After breakfast, Mrs. Chen took Eliza into a small office off the kitchen. She gestured to a chair, and Eliza sat, Noah on her lap. Let's talk plainly, Mrs. Chen said, settling behind a scarred wooden desk. You need a place to stay. I need help running this house. I'm getting older, and the work is getting harder. I could use someone reliable. She folded her hands on the desk. Here's what I'm offering. You work for me, cooking, cleaning, helping with the laundry, whatever needs doing. In exchange, you get your room, 3 meals a day, and a small wage. 50 cents a week to start. If you prove yourself, we can renegotiate. 50 cents wasn't much, but combined with the $43 from Thomas's furs, it would keep her and Noah secure for months. Maybe longer if she was careful. What about Noah? Eliza asked. I can't work if I'm constantly tending to him. We'll manage. There's always women around who can watch a baby for a few hours. And when he gets older, he can play with the other children. We make it work. Mrs. Chen's eyes were sharp but not unkind. Do we have a deal? Eliza thought of the cabin, cold and empty. Thought of the fear and hunger and desperation. Thought of the future, uncertain but possible. We have a deal. They shook hands, and just like that, Eliza Moore became a working woman. The days developed a rhythm. Eliza rose early, helped Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast for the boarders, cleaned rooms, did laundry, helped with dinner. The work was hard but not unbearable, and there was something comforting about the routine of it. Wake, work, eat, sleep, simple and human. Noah thrived in the warmth and regular feeding. Within a week, he was smiling again, reaching for things, making the happy baby sounds that Eliza had feared she'd never hear again. Dorothy Hutchinson proved a godsend, often watching Noah while Eliza worked, and the 2 women became friends. You're good with him, Eliza said one afternoon, watching Dorothy rock Noah while she folded laundry. I raised 4 of my own, and Martha's got 6 now, if you can believe it. I've held more babies than I can count. Dorothy smiled down at Noah. This one's a sweetheart, though. Such a good disposition. He gets that from his father, Eliza said quietly. Thomas was always even-tempered, never got angry, even when things went wrong. Dorothy gave her a sympathetic look. Caleb told us what happened. I'm so sorry, Eliza. It's a hard thing, losing a husband so young. I keep thinking I should feel more, Eliza admitted. I'm sad, but I'm also just tired and relieved to be somewhere safe. Is that wrong? Not wrong at all. Grief isn't just sadness. It's exhaustion and anger and relief and confusion all mixed up together. You feel what you feel, no judgment in that. Caleb stayed in town for a week, taking a room at the boarding house. He told Eliza he wanted to make sure she was settled, but she suspected he was also keeping his promise to Thomas, making sure his friend's widow was truly cared for. On the third day, he took her to the cemetery. It sat on a hill behind the church, a small plot with perhaps 20 graves marked by wooden crosses or simple stones. Caleb led her to a fresh grave near the back, the earth still dark and recently turned. A wooden cross bore Thomas's name, carved clearly. Thomas Robert Moore, 1844 to 1875, beloved husband and father. Eliza stood looking at it for a long time. The wind blew cold across the hilltop, and somewhere in the town below a dog barked. Normal sounds. Life continuing. "I should say something," she whispered. "But I don't know what." "Say whatever feels right," Caleb said. He stood a respectful distance away, giving her space but staying close enough that she wasn't alone. Eliza knelt in the snow, placing one hand on the cold ground. "I'm sorry I wasn't here," she said quietly. "I'm sorry you died alone, with strangers. I'm sorry for a lot of things." She paused, tears freezing on her cheeks. "But I'm not sorry for our time together. You gave me Noah. You gave me 2 years of happiness. You tried to build us something good, and that matters. Even if it ended too soon, it matters." She stayed there until her knees went numb and her fingers were too cold to feel. Then Caleb helped her up, and they walked back to town in silence. That night, Eliza wrote a letter to her family in Pennsylvania. She told them about Thomas's death, about Noah's health, about her new situation in Sweetwater. She didn't tell them how close she'd come to dying herself. She didn't tell them about the desperation or the fear, just the facts, simple and clean. She posted the letter the next morning, knowing it would be months before she received a reply, if she received one at all. Her family hadn't approved of her marriage to Thomas, hadn't understood her desire to go west. They might not answer. But she sent the letter anyway. A bridge extended across the miles, even if no one crossed it. By the end of the second week, Eliza felt almost normal. She'd gained back some of the weight she'd lost, and color had returned to her face. Noah was growing visibly, his little limbs filling out, his eyes bright and curious. She was folding sheets in the laundry room one afternoon when Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway. "There's someone here to see you," the older woman said. "Man named Hendricks, from the general store." Eliza's heart skipped. The money. Thomas's money that she'd almost forgotten about in the settling-in process. She found Mr. Hendricks waiting in the parlor, a tall, thin man with wire spectacles and a serious expression. He stood when she entered. "Mrs. Moore, I've been meaning to call on you. I'm Samuel Hendricks. I run the general store." "Mr. Hendricks, Caleb mentioned you were holding something for me." "That's right." He pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. "Your husband sold his furs and hides to me the day he arrived in town. $43, fair counted. I set it aside when I heard—" He trailed off delicately. "Well, it's yours now." Eliza took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were bills and coins, exactly as promised. $43. Thomas's last gift to her. "Thank you," she managed, "for keeping it safe." "It was the right thing to do." Mr. Hendricks hesitated, then added, "Your husband was a good man, Mrs. Moore. Honest in his dealings. He helped run down the men who'd been terrorizing our community. That counts for something." "Thank you," Eliza said again, because what else was there to say? After he left, she sat holding the envelope, feeling the weight of the money, the weight of all it represented. This was Thomas's work, his effort, his final provision for his family. He'd died trying to protect people, but he'd also died having taken care of his own. That night, Eliza counted out the money and divided it carefully. She gave Mrs. Chen $2 for the first month's room and board, even though they'd agreed she'd work for her keep. The older woman tried to refuse, but Eliza insisted. "I need to pay my way," she said firmly. "It matters to me." Mrs. Chen understood and accepted the money. The rest Eliza tucked away in the trunk, hidden beneath her mother's quilt. Security, options, the freedom to choose her own path when the time came. 1 month became 2. Spring was still far off, but the days were getting imperceptibly longer. Eliza settled into her new life with surprising ease. She worked hard, earned her keep,
and slowly built friendships with the other women in the boarding house. Dorothy Hutchinson taught her how to make better bread. Mrs. Patterson showed her tricks for getting stains out of laundry. Even Mrs. Chen, stern and businesslike most of the time, occasionally smiled at something Noah did and told stories about her own children, grown now and scattered across the West. Caleb left after that first week but returned monthly, always with a reason: business at the land office, horses to sell, supplies to buy. But he always stopped at the boarding house, always asked after Eliza and Noah, always stayed for dinner if Mrs. Chen invited him. Eliza found herself looking forward to these visits more than she wanted to admit. Caleb was easy company, never demanding anything, never pushing her to talk about Thomas or the past if she didn't want to. He just existed, steady and reliable, a reminder that not all men disappeared or died or failed. On one of these visits, in late February, Caleb brought news. "I stopped by your homestead," he said over coffee in the boarding house parlor. "Made sure everything was secure, fixed a shutter that had come loose in the wind. The cabin's holding up fine." "Thank you for checking." Eliza poured more coffee into his cup. "I've been thinking about it, about what to do come spring." "And?" "I don't know yet. Part of me wants to go back, try to work it. But another part knows that's foolish. I can't run a homestead alone with a baby, no matter how much I want to." Caleb nodded slowly. Those are both true things. Wanting to go back and knowing you can't are not contradictory. "So what do I do?" "You've got time still to decide. Spring's a ways off yet, but when it comes, you've got options. You could sell the claim. You could lease the land to someone else and collect income from it. You could hire help and try to work it from town." He met her eyes. "Or you could let it go entirely and build something new here. All of those are valid choices, Eliza. There's no wrong answer." "Feels like there is. Feels like giving up the land would be giving up on Thomas's dream. Thomas's dream was to build a good life with you. The land was just a means to that end. If the land doesn't serve that purpose anymore, it's just dirt." Caleb's voice was gentle but firm. "Don't hold on to something that's hurting you just because you think you should. Thomas wouldn't want that." The words settled into her like seeds, quiet but persistent. Maybe Caleb was right. Maybe holding on to the cabin, the claim, the dream of frontier homesteading was less about honoring Thomas and more about her own fear of letting go. That night, Eliza lay in bed with Noah sleeping beside her and thought about futures, about the choices that lay ahead and the woman she was becoming in the aftermath of loss. She wasn't the same person who'd arrived in Wyoming 2 years ago, starry-eyed and in love. She wasn't even the same person who'd opened the cabin door to Caleb 3 months ago, desperate and dying. She was something new, something harder but also stronger, something shaped by survival. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly who she needed to be. March arrived with false promises of spring. The snow melted during the day, turning the streets of Sweetwater into rivers of mud, then froze again at night into treacherous ice. Eliza learned to navigate the unpredictable weather, learned which boardwalks were safest, which shortcuts through town were worth the risk. She also learned the rhythms of the boarding house more deeply. Mrs. Chen ran a tight operation, but there was flexibility within the structure. When Noah was fussy, the other women stepped in without being asked. When Eliza had a particularly hard day, the grief hitting her in unexpected waves, Mrs. Chen would assign her tasks that required less interaction, letting her work through it in her own way. "You're doing well," Mrs. Chen said one morning as they prepared breakfast together. The older woman's hands moved efficiently, cracking eggs into a bowl. "Better than most widows I've seen. You've got steel in you." "I don't feel like steel. I feel like I'm barely holding together." That's what steel looks like when it's being forged. All heat and pressure and the feeling you might break. But you don't break. You bend, you reshape, you become stronger. Mrs. Chen whisked the eggs vigorously. Give yourself credit for that. Eliza carried those words with her through the morning, through washing dishes and scrubbing floors and changing Noah's diapers. Steel being forged. Maybe that's exactly what this was. That afternoon, Dorothy Hutchinson invited her for tea in the parlor. Several of the other boarding house women joined them. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah Reeves, who was still waiting for the passes to clear so she could continue to California, and a new arrival named Ann Cordell, a young woman whose husband had died in a mining accident. We thought you might want to talk, Dorothy said, pouring tea into mismatched cups. About what comes next. We've all been where you are, in one way or another.
Alone and trying to figure out how to keep going. Eliza looked around the circle of women. Each face held its own story of loss and survival. Mrs. Patterson's husband had died of consumption 3 years ago, leaving her with no children and no means of support until she'd discovered she could teach. Sarah's fiancé had been killed by bandits on the trail west, but she'd continued alone rather than turn back. Anne was only 22, her husband dead barely a month. "How do you do it?" Eliza asked quietly. "How do you wake up every day and keep going when the person you planned your life with is gone?" "You just do," Mrs. Patterson said simply. She was older than the others, perhaps 45, with gray threading through her brown hair. "Not because you're brave or strong, but because the alternative is lying down and dying, and most of us are too stubborn for that." Sarah laughed, a sound both bitter and genuine. "Stubborn is right. My mother told me I was too stubborn to know when to quit. Guess she was right about that." "It gets easier," Dorothy added. "Not better, exactly. You don't stop missing them. But the missing becomes something you can live with instead of something that drowns you. Time does that, whether you want it to or not." Anne, the youngest and newest to grief, spoke up softly. "Do you think about remarrying? Is that even allowed? William's only been gone a month, but people are already suggesting I need to find another husband, like he was just replaceable." The room fell quiet for a moment. Eliza felt the question like a weight. She hadn't let herself think about that possibility. It felt too soon, too raw, too much like betrayal. "People will always have opinions about what widows should do," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Remarry, don't remarry, stay alone, find a man to take care of you. What they really mean is they're uncomfortable with women who exist outside the neat categories they understand." She sipped her tea. "My advice? Don't let anyone rush you. If you want to remarry someday, do it. If you don't, don't. But make it your choice, not something you do because people expect it." "What did you choose?" Eliza asked her. "I chose to stay single. Found I liked my independence once I had it. Teaching gives me purpose and income. I don't need a husband to feel complete." Mrs. Patterson smiled slightly. "Though I won't lie, there are moments I miss having a partner, someone to share the hard days with. But overall, I'm content with my choice." Dorothy set down her teacup. "I remarried after my first husband died. Waited 3 years, met John, and knew he was right for me. It wasn't the same as my first marriage, couldn't be. But it was good in its own way. Different, but good." She looked at Eliza directly. "The point is there's no timeline, no rules. You figure out what works for you." The conversation drifted to other topics. The upcoming spring planting, the new families moving to Sweetwater, gossip about the saloon owner's daughter who'd run off with a cowboy. But Eliza kept thinking about what had been said, about choice, about making her own way instead of following someone else's script. That evening, after Noah was asleep, Eliza counted her money again. The $43 from Thomas's furs had been carefully managed. With her small wages from Mrs. Chen and living frugally, she'd even managed to add to it slightly. She had $48 now, tucked away in the trunk. Not wealthy, but not desperate either. Enough to give her breathing room. Enough to make choices. She was sitting at the small writing desk in her room, working on a letter to her family, when there was a soft knock on the door. "Come in," she called. Mrs. Chen entered, carrying a bundle of fabric. "I have something for you. A woman in town ordered this dress made, then changed her mind. Already paid for the fabric and labor. I thought it might fit you." Eliza stood and took the bundle. It unfolded into a simple day dress in deep blue cotton, well made with neat seams and a practical cut. She held it up to herself, and it looked about right. "Mrs. Chen, I can't accept this. It's too much." "Nonsense. The dress exists. Someone should wear it. Besides," the older woman's expression softened, "you've been wearing the same 2 dresses since you arrived. You could use something new." "Thank you." Eliza's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. It wasn't just a dress. It was kindness. It was someone seeing her need and meeting it without making her feel small. Mrs. Chen waved off the thanks. "Try it on. Make sure it fits. If it needs alterations, Dorothy can help. She's good with a needle." After she left, Eliza changed into the dress.
It fit well, perhaps a little loose in the waist, but otherwise perfect. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the wash basin and barely recognized the woman looking back. Her face had filled out since those desperate days in the cabin. Her hair, which she'd taken to pinning up in a neat bun, was clean and shiny. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. She looked healthy, strong, like someone who might actually have a future. The realization hit her with unexpected force. She was going to survive this. Not just survive, she was going to build something new from the wreckage. The certainty of it settled into her bones like truth. April brought real spring, and with it, decisions. Caleb returned to Sweetwater on the 15th, riding in with a string of horses to sell and his usual easy manner. Eliza was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house when she saw him coming up the street. Something in her chest lifted at the sight of him, and she had to examine that feeling carefully. Was it just relief at seeing a friendly face? Or was it something more? She pushed the thought away and waved. Caleb dismounted and walked over, his boots squelching in the mud. "Mrs. Moore," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "you're looking well." "I am well. And please, call me Eliza. We're past formalities, don't you think?" A smile touched his weathered face. "Eliza, then. How's Noah?" "Growing like a weed, he's started trying to sit up on his own. Won't be long before he's crawling and getting into everything." "That's good. That's real good." Caleb glanced at the boarding house, then back at her. "I stopped by your homestead on the way in. Wanted to check on it before talking to you." Eliza's hand stilled on the shirt she was hanging. "And?" "It's fine. Structurally sound. No damage from the winter. But Eliza—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The fields are going to need work soon if you want to plant anything this year, and the cabin needs someone living in it, keeping it maintained. Otherwise, it'll start to deteriorate." "I know." She'd been thinking about this for weeks, circling around the decision without quite making it. "I've been trying to figure out what to do." "Have you considered selling? I know a few families looking for established claims. You'd get a fair price, more than enough to set you and Noah up comfortably for a good while." The thought of selling felt like cutting off a limb. But Caleb was right. She couldn't work the homestead from town, couldn't maintain it properly while raising a baby alone. And every day she delayed was another day the land sat unused, the cabin empty. "What would I do?" she asked. "If I sold, stay here permanently?" "That's one option. You're doing good work for Mrs. Chen. She speaks highly of you. You could make a life here in Sweetwater. Raise Noah in town where there are schools and people and opportunity." Caleb shifted his weight. "Or you could do something else entirely. Move to a bigger city. Go back east. The money from the sale would give you choices." Choices. That word again. "I need to think about it," Eliza said. "Take your time. But not too much time. If you want to sell, spring's the best season for it. Families are making plans for planting. Come summer, interest will drop off." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the spring breeze carrying the scent of new grass and thawing earth. Eliza felt the weight of the decision pressing on her, but also a strange sense of possibility. Whatever she chose, it would be her choice. Not Thomas's dream, or her father's expectations, or society's rules. Hers. "Stay for dinner," she said impulsively. "Mrs. Chen always cooks extra when she knows you're in town." Caleb's smile broadened. "I'd like that." That night, around Mrs. Chen's long dining table, Eliza watched Caleb interact with the other boarders. He was easy with everyone, respectful with the women, friendly with the few men who boarded there, gentle when Noah fussed, and Dorothy passed him over for Caleb to hold while she ate. "You're a natural with babies," Sarah Reeves observed. "Most men I know act like infants might explode if they touch them wrong." "Had practice with my sister's kids," Caleb said, adjusting Noah in his arms. "Once you've changed enough diapers, the fear goes away." Mrs. Patterson laughed. "A man who admits to changing diapers. Will wonders never cease?" The easy teasing continued through dinner, and Eliza found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. This felt normal. This felt like family, even though they were all essentially strangers brought together by circumstance. After dinner, Caleb caught her on the porch as she was taking out the scraps for Mrs. Chen's chickens.
Eliza, can I talk to you a minute? Of course. He leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the darkening street. I've been thinking about your situation, about the homestead, and what you should do. And I have a suggestion, if you're willing to hear it. I'm listening. What if you didn't sell? What if you leased the land to someone reliable who'd work it and give you a percentage of the profits? That way you keep the claim, keep the option of returning someday, but you don't have to work it yourself right now. Eliza considered this. Do you know someone reliable who'd want to lease it? I might. There's a family, the Johnsons, just moved to the area. Good people, hard workers. They've got 3 grown sons looking to farm. They don't have money to buy land outright, but they could work a lease arrangement. They'd maintain the property, plant crops, run some cattle. You'd get a share of whatever they produce or sell.
Why would they agree to that instead of just claiming their own land? Because good claims are getting scarce around here, and establishing a new homestead from scratch takes years. Your place already has a cabin, cleared fields, a well. That's worth a lot. Caleb met her eyes. I could set up a meeting if you want. Let you talk to them, see if it feels right. It was a good solution, practical. It would give her income without the burden of working the land herself, and it kept her options open for the future. But there was something else in Caleb's offer, something that made her look at him more closely. Why are you doing this? She asked. All of this. You kept your promise to Thomas. You made sure I was safe, got me to town, helped me get settled. You've done more than enough. So why are you still helping? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful in the fading light. When he spoke, his voice was careful. Because I told you about Sarah, about losing her in that fire. What I didn't tell you was what came after. The years of drifting, of not letting myself care about anyone, because caring meant risking that kind of loss again. He looked at her directly. But somewhere along the way, I realized that protecting yourself from loss also means cutting yourself off from life, from connection, from the things that make being alive worthwhile. Eliza's heart was beating faster. She thought she knew where this was going, but she wasn't sure how she felt about it. When I met Thomas, when I made that promise to him, I thought I was just doing a favor for a decent man. But when I came to your cabin and found you and Noah, he paused. I saw myself, Eliza, saw what I'd been doing. You were dying, but you were still fighting, still trying to care for your son even when you had nothing left. That kind of courage, that kind of strength, it reminded me what matters. Caleb, I'm not saying this to pressure you or to suggest anything improper. I know it's too soon. You're still grieving, still finding your feet. I respect that completely. His gray eyes were steady, honest. But I want you to know that I'm here. Not out of obligation or pity, but because I choose to be. Because helping you, being around you and Noah, has reminded me how to live instead of just exist. The words hung in the evening air between them. Eliza felt a tumult of emotions, gratitude, confusion, a flutter of something that might be interest if she let it be, and underneath it all, fear. Fear of moving too fast, of dishonoring Thomas's memory, of making a mistake that would cost her the stability she'd fought so hard to build. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. Caleb straightened. Think about the lease arrangement. Let me know if you want to meet the Johnsons. Everything else, all the rest of it, that can wait as long as you need. He left then, walking down the porch steps and into the muddy street toward the hotel, where he kept a room when in town. Eliza stood alone on the porch, watching him go, her mind racing. She went inside and found Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, washing the last of the dinner dishes. You look troubled, the older woman said without preamble. Want to talk about it? Eliza picked up a dish towel and started drying. Caleb made me an offer about the homestead, a lease arrangement with a family he knows. That's a good solution, practical. Mrs. Chen handed her a clean plate. But that's not what's troubling you. No. Eliza dried the plate slowly. He also told me, he implied, I think he has feelings for me, or could have them, eventually. And that surprises you? Yes. No, I don't know. Eliza set down the plate. It's too soon, isn't it? Thomas has only been gone 5 months. People will talk.
They'll say I'm disrespecting his memory, that I'm too quick to replace him. Mrs. Chen turned off the water and faced Eliza fully. Let me tell you something about people and their talk. They will always talk. If you remarry in 5 months, they'll say it's too soon. If you wait 5 years, they'll say you're too old or too set in your ways. If you never remarry, they'll call you cold or difficult. There is no winning with gossip. She dried her hands on her apron. The only question that matters is, what do you want? Not what people think you should want. What do you actually want? I don't know, Eliza said honestly. I liked being married, I liked having a partner, but I also like the independence I've found here. I like making my own money, making my own decisions. I don't want to give that up. Then don't. A good marriage doesn't require you to give up yourself. It should add to who you are, not subtract from it. Mrs. Chen's expression softened. Caleb Hart strikes me as the kind of man who understands that, but that's something you'd have to determine for yourself. It's too soon, Eliza repeated, but with less certainty. Maybe, maybe not. Only you can decide that. But Eliza, Mrs. Chen waited until she had her full attention. Don't punish yourself for having feelings. Don't deny yourself possibility just because you think you should still be drowning in grief. Thomas loved you. He would want you to be happy, wouldn't he? The question hit home. Would Thomas want her to stay alone forever, locked in mourning? No. He'd been too generous for that, too loving. He'd want her and Noah to thrive, to build good lives, to find joy again. But knowing that intellectually and feeling it in her heart were two different things. That night, Eliza lay in bed with Noah asleep beside her and thought about the future, about the homestead and whether to lease it, about staying in Sweetwater or going somewhere else, about Caleb and the careful way he'd spoken, giving her space while also being honest about his feelings, about what she wanted. The answer, when it came, was surprising in its clarity. She wanted stability for Noah. She wanted work that mattered and gave her purpose. She wanted community and friendship. And yes, eventually, she wanted partnership again. Not right now. Not when the grief was still fresh, but someday. Whether that partnership would be with Caleb or someone else, whether it would happen in a year or 5 years or never, that she couldn't know. But acknowledging that she was open to it, that she wasn't closing herself off to that possibility, felt like a kind of freedom. She fell asleep with that thought, and for the first time in months, she didn't dream of the cabin or the cold or Thomas's absence. She dreamed of spring fields and Noah's laughter and a future that held possibility instead of just survival. The next morning, she found Caleb at the livery stable where he was checking on his horses before heading out of town. I want to meet the Johnsons, she said without preamble. Set it up. He looked up from examining a horse's hoof, surprise and pleasure crossing his face. You sure? I'm sure. The lease makes sense. It keeps my options open while giving me income and ensuring the property doesn't just sit empty. She crossed her arms, businesslike. But I want fair terms. I want it in writing, and I want to meet them myself and make sure they're the right fit. Fair enough. I'll arrange it. Caleb set down the horse's hoof and stood. They're good people, Eliza. I think you'll like them. We'll see. The meeting happened 2 days later at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. The Johnsons turned out to be exactly as Caleb had described, a hard-working family with 3 strong sons and a practical approach to farming. Mr. Johnson was in his 50s, weathered but energetic. His wife Mary was a quiet woman with kind eyes. We'd treat your land like our own, Mr. Johnson said, sitting in Mrs. Chen's parlor with his hat in his hands. Build it up, care for it proper. We're thinking corn and wheat in the fields, maybe some cattle if the grazing's good. The cabin we'd maintain and live in, keep it sound. What percentage are you offering? Eliza asked. We were thinking 60-40. 60 for us, 40 for you. We're putting in all the labor, taking all the risk. But if that doesn't sit right, we could negotiate. Eliza thought about it. 60-40 seemed fair given that they'd be doing all the work. I want it to be 50-50 on any improvements to the property. If you build a barn or add to the cabin, we split the cost and I keep partial ownership. Mr. Johnson considered this, then nodded. That's fair. We agree to that. They worked out the details over the next hour. A 5-year lease with option to renew. 40% of all crop sales and livestock profits to Eliza. Shared cost on improvements. The Johnsons would move in by May 1st and start planting. I'll have a lawyer draw up the contract, Eliza said. Make it all legal and proper. Sounds good to us, Mr. Johnson said. He stood and offered his hand. Thank you for this opportunity, Mrs. Moore. We'll do right by you. Eliza shook his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. See that you do. After they left, Caleb stayed behind, and Eliza poured them both coffee. You did good, he said. Drove a fair bargain. Better than I expected, actually. I learned something these past months, Eliza said, about not selling myself short, about asking for what I'm worth. She looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup. You helped teach me that. You always had it in you. You just needed a chance to find it. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Eliza spoke again carefully, about what you said the other night. On the porch. Caleb's expression became guarded. You don't have to... Let me finish. She set down her cup. I can't promise you anything right now. It's too soon, and I'm still figuring out who I am without Thomas. But I want you to know that I'm not closed to possibility. Eventually, when the time is right. Something eased in Caleb's face. Not quite a smile, but close. Eventually is good. Eventually I can work with. Good. Then let's just be friends for now. Let me get through this first year. Let me see how the lease works out, how Noah grows, how I feel once I've had time to properly grieve and heal. Friends, Caleb agreed. That's a good place to start. And it was. Over the next few months, as spring turned to summer, Caleb became a regular presence in Sweetwater. He'd stop by the boarding house when he was in town, have dinner, play with Noah, talk with Eliza about everything and nothing. There was no pressure, no expectations beyond simple companionship. The Johnsons moved into the homestead and proved to be as good as their word. They sent monthly reports about the planting, about improvements they were making, about the progress of the crops. By midsummer, Eliza received her first payment from the wheat harvest. It wasn't much, but it was hers, earned from the land Thomas had claimed. She put half in savings and used the rest to buy Noah new clothes and herself a second new dress. Small luxuries, but they represented something larger: independence, self-sufficiency, a future built on her own terms. One evening in July, Eliza sat on Mrs. Chen's porch with Noah in her lap, watching the sun set over Sweetwater's main street. The baby was chattering nonsense, grabbing at her fingers, happy and healthy and growing strong. She thought about this cabin where she'd nearly died, about Thomas buried on the hill behind the church, about the woman she'd been and the woman she was becoming. The grief was still there. She suspected it always would be, but it had changed shape. Instead of drowning her, it had become something she carried, a weight that made her stronger for bearing it. Dorothy came out and sat beside her. Penny, for your thoughts? I was just thinking how strange life is. 6 months ago, I was starving in a cabin, convinced I was going to die. Now I'm here, healthy, working, raising my son, making plans for the future. Eliza looked down at Noah. If someone had told me then that this was possible, I wouldn't have believed them. That's the thing about rock bottom, Dorothy said. The only way left to go is up, and you, Eliza Moore, you've climbed far. I had help, a lot of help. Sure you did. But you also helped yourself. Don't forget that part. Dorothy stood. Supper's almost ready. Mrs. Chen made pot roast. Eliza stayed on the porch a moment longer, Noah warm in her arms, the evening air soft around them. Somewhere out there was the homestead, being worked by good people. Somewhere was Caleb, probably on the trail with his horses, thinking his own thoughts. Somewhere was a future she couldn't yet see, but was learning to trust might hold good things. She stood and went inside to dinner, to the warm kitchen and the family she'd found in this unlikely place, and felt something she'd thought lost forever. Peace. Summer deepened into autumn, and with it came changes that Eliza had learned to welcome rather than fear. Noah celebrated his first birthday in September with a small party in Mrs. Chen's dining room. Dorothy had baked a cake, and all the boarding house residents gathered to watch the baby demolish a slice with his chubby hands, smearing frosting across his delighted face. Caleb had been there too, having timed his visit to coincide with the celebration. He'd carved Noah a wooden horse, smooth and perfect, small enough for baby hands to grip. When Noah had squealed with joy at the gift, Caleb's face had lit up in a way that made something flutter in Eliza's chest. She'd allowed herself to acknowledge that feeling now. Not act on it, not yet, but at least admit it existed. Attraction, interest, the possibility of something more than friendship when the time was right. The lease with the Johnsons continued to prove successful. The fall harvest brought wheat and corn, and Eliza's share translated to more money than she'd seen in one place since coming west. She was careful with it, saving most while allowing herself small comforts: better shoes, a warm winter coat for Noah, books to read in the evenings. Mrs. Chen had increased her wages too, recognizing the value of her work. Eliza had become indispensable to the running of the boarding house, managing not just the cleaning and cooking but also the accounts when Mrs. Chen's eyes grew too tired for the close work of numbers. "You have a head for business," Mrs. Chen observed one October afternoon as they reviewed the month's expenses together. "Better than mine, honestly. You see patterns I miss." "My father kept the books for his shop back in Pennsylvania. He taught me young." Eliza made a notation about a supplier who was charging too much for flour. "We should try Morrison's Mill instead. Their prices are better and the quality's the same." "See? That's exactly what I mean." Mrs. Chen sat back in her chair. "Eliza, I want to talk to you about something." The serious tone made Eliza look up from the ledger. "What is it?" "I'm getting old. My hands ache in the mornings, my back protests the heavy work. I've been thinking it's time to slow down, maybe even consider selling the boarding house and retiring." Mrs. Chen held up a hand before Eliza could protest. "I'm not saying I've decided, but I am saying I need to plan for the future. And part of that plan involves you if you're willing." Eliza's heart was beating faster. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'd like to make you a partner, not just an employee, but a co-owner. You'd have a stake in the business, a share of the profits, a say in how things are run." Mrs. Chen's dark eyes were sharp and assessing. "Eventually, when I'm ready to step back entirely, you could buy me out completely. This place could be yours." The offer took Eliza's breath away. A business, real ownership, security not just for now but for the future, for Noah's future. "Why?" she managed. "Why me?" "Because you've earned it. Because you're smart and hardworking and honest. Because you understand what it means to fight for survival and come out stronger." Mrs. Chen's expression softened. "And because I like you, Eliza Moore. I'd rather see this place in your hands than sell to some stranger who might not care about it the way we do." Eliza thought about the offer, turning it over in her mind. It would mean commitment to Sweetwater, to this life she'd built from the wreckage of her first dreams. It would mean putting down roots, choosing this path deliberately instead of just surviving day to day. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need, but not too much time. I'm old, not immortal." Mrs. Chen's smile took the sting from the words. That evening, Eliza walked to the cemetery on the hill. She hadn't been since that first visit with Caleb, but she found herself needing to now. Needing to talk to Thomas, or at least to the memory of him. The wooden cross was weathering, the carved letters beginning to fade. Eliza knelt in the grass, now brown with approaching winter, and placed her hand on the earth that covered him. "I have a decision to make," she said quietly. "Mrs. Chen wants to make me her partner. Eventually I could own the boarding house outright. It's a good offer, a secure future for me and Noah." She paused, watching clouds drift across the autumn sky. "But taking it means letting go of the homestead dream, means accepting that I'm not the frontier wife you married, that I'm becoming something different." The wind rustled through the cemetery grass, carrying the scent of wood smoke from town. Eliza waited, though she wasn't sure what for. A sign? Permission? Absolution? "I think you'd understand," she continued. "You always wanted me to be happy, to be safe. This would do that. This would give Noah opportunities, education, community, a stable home. It's just not the home we planned." Her voice cracked slightly. "I loved our dreams, Thomas. I loved you. But I'm learning to love what is instead of mourning what isn't. I hope that's all right." No answer came, of course. But sitting there in the fading light, Eliza felt something shift inside her. Not closure exactly. She wasn't sure grief ever truly closed, but acceptance. Thomas was gone. The life they'd planned was gone. But she was still here, still breathing, still capable of building something new. She could honor his memory by living well, by giving Noah a good life, by choosing happiness when it was offered. That wasn't betrayal. It was survival transformed into purpose. "I'm going to take it," she said aloud. "The partnership. I'm going to build something here, something solid and lasting, and I'm going to be happy, Thomas. Eventually. When I'm ready." She stood, brushing grass from her skirt. "Thank you for the time we had. Thank you for Noah. And thank you for understanding, wherever you are, that I have to move forward now." She walked back to town as the sun set, feeling lighter than she had in months. The next morning, she told Mrs. Chen yes. They drew up papers with the town lawyer, making it official. Eliza Moore became part owner of Chen's boarding house, with a clear path to full ownership within 5 years. The contract was fair and detailed, protecting both women's interests. Word spread quickly through Sweetwater. A widow going into business, becoming a property owner in her own right, it was unusual enough to generate talk. Some of it was supportive, some skeptical, some outright critical. "A woman her age ought to be thinking about remarriage, not business," Eliza overheard one matron say in the general store. What kind of example is she setting? She'd learned to let such comments slide off. She had work to do and a future to build. Other people's opinions couldn't feed Noah or pay the bills. Caleb returned to Sweetwater in late October, and Eliza told him the news over coffee in the boarding house parlor. His reaction was immediate and genuine. "That's wonderful, Eliza. Really wonderful. Mrs. Chen couldn't have chosen better." He raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "To the newest businesswoman in Sweetwater." She clinked her cup against his, smiling. "It feels surreal. A year ago I was starving in a cabin, and now I own part of a business." "You earned it, every bit of it." Caleb set down his cup, his expression turning more serious. "Does this mean you're staying in Sweetwater permanently? You're not thinking about going back east or moving on?" "I'm staying. This is home now, for me and Noah both." Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Relief, maybe, or hope. But all he said was, "I'm glad." They fell into their usual easy conversation, talking about the boarding house, the lease payments from the Johnsons, Noah's latest accomplishments. But underneath the casual talk, Eliza sensed a question waiting to be asked. Finally, as they were finishing their coffee, Caleb spoke carefully. "Eliza, it's been over a year now since Thomas died. I know you asked for time, and I've tried to respect that. But I need to know, is there a chance, for us, I mean, eventually?" The directness of it should have flustered her, but instead Eliza found it refreshing. She appreciated honesty, especially after so much uncertainty. "I think so," she said slowly. "I'm not ready yet to make promises or commitments, but yes, Caleb, I think there's a chance. You've been patient and kind and respectful. You've been a friend when I needed one most. Those aren't small things. But," he heard the hesitation in her voice, "but I need to be sure I'm choosing you for the right reasons. Not because you saved me, not out of gratitude or loneliness, but because it's what I truly want." She met his eyes. "You deserve that. Someone who chooses you deliberately, not just because you're there." Caleb nodded slowly. "That's fair, more than fair. And I can wait, Eliza. I'm good at waiting." "I know you are. That's one of the things She paused, then finished honestly. "One of the things I'm starting to love about you." The word hung between them. Love, not quite spoken, but acknowledged. Caleb's expression softened, and he reached across the table to cover her hand with his. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Winter came again, but this time Eliza faced it from a position of strength. The boarding house was warm and full. Her partnership with Mrs. Chen was thriving, and Noah was a healthy, happy toddler who filled her days with laughter and chaos. She visited Thomas's grave once a month, keeping it tended, talking to him about Noah's progress and her own life. It had become a ritual of remembrance rather than grief, a way to maintain connection without being trapped by loss. The Johnsons sent word in December that they'd added a small barn to the homestead and were planning to expand their cattle operation in the spring. The improvements increased the property value, and Eliza's 40% share of the profits continued to provide steady income. She was, by any measure, doing well, independent, secure, building a future on her own terms. Caleb continued his regular visits, and Eliza found herself looking forward to them more each time. They'd moved beyond simple friendship into something deeper, a partnership of equals, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. He made her laugh. He listened when she talked about her fears and dreams. He played with Noah as naturally as if the boy were his own. And increasingly, Eliza found herself thinking about what it would mean to let this relationship become something more. One evening in February, almost exactly a year after she'd arrived in Sweetwater, Eliza sat in her room going through her papers. The lease agreement with the Johnsons, the partnership contract with Mrs. Chen, her carefully maintained accounts showing steady growth in her savings. At the bottom of the box was her marriage certificate to Thomas, yellowed and creased but still legible. She held it carefully, reading the words. Eliza Catherine Bennett and Thomas Robert Moore, joined in matrimony June 15, 1873. 2 years of marriage. 2 years of building a life together before it was all taken away. It had been good while it lasted, not perfect, but good. Thomas had been kind and hard-working and full of dreams. She'd loved him genuinely. But that chapter was closed now. The woman who'd signed that certificate, starry-eyed and 19, barely existed anymore. She'd been forged into someone new by loss and survival and hard-won strength. The question was, could this new version of herself love again? And if so, was Caleb the right person to love? Eliza thought about it honestly, examining her feelings the way she'd learned to examine the boarding house accounts, clearly without sentimentality clouding the truth. She cared for Caleb, respected him, was attracted to him, trusted him, enjoyed his company, could imagine a future with him, one built on partnership rather than rescue, on mutual choice rather than desperation. That felt right. That felt real. The realization settled into her chest like certainty. She was ready, not to replace Thomas. That would never be possible. But to choose something new. To choose Caleb deliberately and honestly for who he was and what they could build together. She put the marriage certificate back in the box, handling it gently. That was history now, precious but past. It was time to look forward. When Caleb came to town the following week, Eliza asked him to take a walk with her. It was a cold afternoon, but the sun was shining and the worst of winter seemed to be loosening its grip. They strolled down Sweetwater's main street, Noah bundled between them in a small wagon Caleb had built. "I've been thinking," Eliza began, "about us, about what comes next." Caleb glanced at her, his expression carefully neutral. And I think I'm ready, not for anything rushed or improper, but for courting, real courting, with the intention of seeing where this goes." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "If you still want that." The smile that broke across Caleb's face was like sunrise. "I want that. I've wanted that for months, but I was trying to be patient." "You have been patient, too patient, maybe. I appreciate it, but I also don't want to waste any more time being cautious about something I know I want." Eliza took a breath. "So yes, let's court properly. Let people talk if they want to. Let's see if what I think this could be actually matches reality. And what do you think this could be? A partnership, a real one, between equals. You doing your work with the horses, me running the boarding house, both of us raising Noah together, building something solid and lasting." She met his eyes steadily. "I'm not looking for someone to save me or take care of me. I can do that myself now. I'm looking for someone to walk beside me. Can you be that?" "I can," Caleb said firmly. "I want to be that. I don't want to own you or control you, Eliza. I just want to be with you, to build a life together, whatever shape that takes." "Good. Then we understand each other." Caleb took her hand, his grip warm even through her glove. "We do. And just so we're clear, I'm not Thomas. I can't be him, and I won't try to be. What we build together will be ours, something new." "I know. That's what I want too." Eliza squeezed his hand. "Something new. Something chosen." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, Noah babbling contentedly in his wagon. Other townspeople noticed them holding hands and would undoubtedly talk, but Eliza found she didn't care. Let them talk. She was done living her life according to other people's timelines and expectations. Over the following months, their courtship unfolded naturally. Caleb made Sweetwater his base of operations, taking a permanent room at the boarding house and building a small stable on the edge of town for his horses. He and Eliza took walks together, had dinners, talked about their hopes for the future. He was good with Noah, patient and playful. The boy started calling him Cal and would squeal with delight whenever Caleb arrived. Watching them together, Eliza's heart would swell with a feeling she was learning to trust again. Happiness. Mrs. Chen, observing the developing relationship, gave her blessing without being asked. "He's a good man, and you're good together. Different from you and Thomas, but that's not a bad thing." "You don't think it's too soon?" Eliza asked. They were working in the kitchen together, preparing dinner for the boarders. "Too soon according to who? Society says a widow should mourn for at least a year, preferably 2, but society doesn't have to live your life. You do." Mrs. Chen handed her a bowl of potatoes to peel. "Besides, you did mourn. You still mourn in your way, but mourning doesn't mean you stop living. Thomas wouldn't have wanted that." "No, he wouldn't have." Eliza started peeling, the familiar task letting her think. "I used to feel guilty about being happy, like I was betraying his memory, but I'm starting to understand that's not how love works. Loving Thomas doesn't mean I can't love someone else. The heart's not a finite resource." "Exactly. And from what I can see, you and Caleb are building something honest and good. That's worth celebrating, not hiding." In May, almost a year and a half after Thomas's death, Caleb asked Eliza to marry him. They were at the homestead, visiting to check on the Johnsons' progress. The family had done remarkable work. The fields were green with growing wheat, the barn was sturdy and well built, and they'd even planted a small orchard of apple trees. "Thomas would have loved this," Eliza said, looking at the thriving farm. "He always wanted apple trees." "He had good instincts about the land," Caleb agreed. They were standing near the cabin, the same cabin where he'd found her dying. "The Johnsons say they'd like to extend their lease another 5 years. They're talking about adding a second barn." "That's good. It means the land is serving a purpose, helping a family build something." Eliza looked at the cabin thoughtfully. "I thought I'd feel sadder being here, but I don't. It's just a place now, not a shrine." "Is that a good thing?" "I think so. It means I've moved on. Not forgotten, but moved on." She turned to Caleb. "I'm ready for the next chapter." Caleb took both her hands in his. "Then let's write it together. Marry me, Eliza. Not because you need saving or I need fixing, but because we choose each other. Because we're better together than apart." The proposal was simple and honest, exactly like Caleb himself. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and it felt right. Not the same as kissing Thomas had felt. That had been youthful passion and dreams of the future. This was different, deeper, built on understanding and respect and genuine partnership. They married in July, a small ceremony at the church with the boarding house residents and a few townspeople in attendance. Dorothy Hutchinson stood up with Eliza, and one of Caleb's horse trading partners served as his best man. Noah, now almost 2, toddled down the aisle carrying rings on a cushion Dorothy had sewn specially for the occasion. Mrs. Chen had closed the boarding house for the day, and the reception was held in the dining room Eliza had worked in for the past year and a half. There was food and laughter and dancing, and when Caleb spun Eliza around the floor, she felt something she'd thought lost forever, pure, uncomplicated joy. They didn't go on a honeymoon. There was too much work to do, and neither of them saw the need. Their life together would be the adventure. Instead, they moved into a small house Caleb had bought on the edge of town, close enough to the boarding house that Eliza could continue her work, but far enough to have their own space. It was modest, 3 rooms, a small kitchen, a yard where Noah could play. But it was theirs, chosen and purchased together, a symbol of their partnership. That first night in their new home, after Noah was asleep and they were sitting together on their porch, Caleb spoke quietly. "I want you to know something. This house, the life we're building, it's ours together. Your money from the boarding house and the homestead lease, my money from the horses. It's all shared, equal partners in everything.
You don't have to say that, Eliza replied. I know you see me as an equal. I do. But I want to be clear about it. I've seen too many marriages where the husband controls everything and the wife has no say, no independence. That's not what I want for us. He took her hand. Your business with Mrs. Chen, your share of the homestead profits, those remain yours. What's mine is yours too, but I'll never ask you to give up what you've built. The words touched something deep in Eliza's heart. This was what partnership looked like. Not one person rescuing another, but two people walking side by side, each bringing their own strength to the journey. Thank you, she said simply, for understanding that matters to me. Of course it matters. You fought too hard for your independence to give it up now. They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies dance in the summer darkness. Eliza thought about the journey that had brought her here, the desperate cabin, the starvation, the knock on the door that had saved her life. Caleb's arrival had been the turning point, but what came after had been her own doing, her strength, her choices. Her hard-won survival transformed into thriving. The months turned to years, and the life Eliza and Caleb built together flourished. The boarding house partnership continued successfully, with Eliza managing the day-to-day operations while Mrs. Chen gradually stepped back. When the older woman passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 years after the wedding, she left her full share of the business to Eliza, making her the sole owner. Noah grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved both his mother and the man he'd learned to call Pa. Caleb treated him exactly as if he were his own son, never making distinctions, never making the boy feel less than fully loved. 2 years after their wedding, Eliza gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Caleb's first love. It was Eliza's idea, a way of honoring the past while embracing the future. Caleb had wept when she suggested it. "You're sure?" he'd asked. "It doesn't bother you?" "She was part of your story," Eliza had replied. "Just like Thomas is part of mine. We don't erase our pasts. We carry them with us and let them make us better." The boarding house became known throughout Wyoming as one of the best-run establishments in the territory. Eliza's business acumen, combined with her genuine care for the people who stayed there, created a reputation that brought steady customers and steady income. The homestead lease with the Johnsons continued year after year. Their improvements transformed the property into a prosperous farm, and Eliza's share of the profits provided additional security for her family. Eventually, when Mr. Johnson approached her about buying the land outright, she agreed, selling it to them at a fair price that reflected both the property's value and the work they'd put into it. She used part of the money to expand the boarding house, adding several more rooms and modernizing the kitchen. The rest she saved for Noah and Sarah's futures, knowing the value of having resources when you needed them. Caleb's horse business thrived as well, his reputation for fair dealing and good stock spreading throughout the territory. He and Eliza worked side by side, two independent people who'd chosen to build a shared life, each respecting the other's work and autonomy. On a summer evening 5 years after their wedding, Eliza stood on the porch of their house watching Noah, now 7, teach 6-year-old Sarah how to ride the gentle mare Caleb had given her. The children's laughter rang out across the yard, pure and joyful. Caleb came out and stood beside her, his arms settling comfortably around her waist. "You look thoughtful," he said. "I was just remembering," Eliza replied. "That cabin, that knock on the door. How different everything could have been if you hadn't come." "But I did come." "You did, and you saved my life, but more than that, you gave me space to save myself, to become strong, to choose my own path." She leaned into him. "That was the real gift." "We saved each other," Caleb said. "I was just existing before I met you, going through the motions. You reminded me what it means to really live." They stood together in the fading light, watching their children play, listening to the sounds of sweet water settling in for the evening. The boarding house, visible from their porch, had lights in every window. Somewhere in town, the church bell rang. Life continued, steady and good. Eliza thought about Thomas sometimes, usually when she visited his grave with flowers or when Noah asked questions about the father he'd never known. She told her son the truth,
that Thomas had been brave and kind and full of dreams, that he'd loved them both, that his death had been heroic even if it was also tragic. And she told him something else, too. People don't just get one chance at love or one path in life. We get to choose again and again, rebuilding when things fall apart, finding new dreams when old ones die. Your father gave me you, and that was a precious gift. But Caleb gave me the chance to become who I needed to be. Both of those things are true. Both of those men shaped our lives. Noah seemed to understand in the way children do that life was complicated, and that was all right. As darkness fell, Caleb called the children in for bed. Eliza followed them inside into the warm house filled with the sounds of family. She helped Sarah into her nightgown while Caleb settled Noah down. They read stories together, all four of them piled on the big bed, and when the children finally drifted off to sleep, Eliza and Caleb carried them to their own beds. Later, lying in bed with Caleb beside her, Eliza thought about the journey that had brought her here. From Pennsylvania to Wyoming, from marriage to widowhood to marriage again. From helpless desperation to hard-won strength, and finally to this, a life built on choice, partnership, and love freely given. She'd been left with a baby and no food, facing death in a frozen cabin. Then a cowboy had knocked with a sack and a smile, and everything had changed. But the change hadn't been just rescue. It had been awakening. A chance to discover who she really was beneath the roles she'd been taught to play. She was Eliza Moorhart now. Businesswoman, mother, wife, survivor, builder of futures. Someone who'd faced the worst and come through stronger. The woman in that cabin would barely recognize her. But that woman was still there, somewhere deep inside. The foundation on which everything else had been built. The strength she'd found in that desperate darkness had never left her. It had simply transformed into something more useful. Resilience, wisdom, the knowledge that she could endure anything and still choose joy. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb murmured in the darkness. "Everything. Nothing. How grateful I am." Eliza turned to face him. "For you, for this life, for the second chances we both got. Third chances, maybe. Fourth. Who's counting?" Caleb's voice held a smile. "The point is, we found each other and we built something good." "We did." Eliza closed her eyes, feeling sleep pulling at her. "We really did." Outside, Wyoming stretched vast and wild under a canopy of stars. The frontier that had nearly killed her had become home. The isolation that had been her prison had transformed into community. The loss that had broken her had eventually made space for new love. She'd learned that survival wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. That strength came from enduring impossible things and choosing to keep living anyway. That love didn't diminish when shared with new people. It multiplied, creating abundance where there had been scarcity. Most of all, she'd learned that she was enough. Not because a man saved her, though Caleb had done that. Not because she ran a successful business, though she did that too. But because she'd faced her darkest moment and refused to give up. Because she'd chosen life when death would have been easier. Because she'd found the courage to build again after everything fell apart. That courage lived in her still, would always live in her, passing down through Noah and Sarah to whatever futures they built. It was her legacy, more valuable than property or money. The knowledge that no matter what life brought, you could endure it. You could survive it. And with time and effort, and maybe a little help from others, you could transform survival into something beautiful. Eliza Moorhart fell asleep in the home she'd chosen, beside the man she'd chosen, surrounded by the family she'd built from the ashes of loss. And if somewhere in her dreams she heard an echo of that long-ago knock on a cabin door, she smiled at the memory. That knock had been the beginning. But this warm house, this full life, this hard-won happiness, this was the destination. And it was worth every difficult step of the journey that had brought her here. The end.